I'm Sylphie, 32, and this is the story of how my husband's dismissive words became the fuel that transformed me from a doubted wife into the CEO who now signs his paychecks. Looking back now, I realize that some of life's most profound transformations begin with a single moment of humiliation. Mine happened on a Tuesday evening in March, sitting around my in-laws' dining table, when I made the mistake of sharing my dreams with people who couldn't see past their own limitations. I had always been the quiet one in the family gatherings, the dutiful daughter-in-law who served dessert and asked about everyone else's lives. But that night, something in me felt brave. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was the business plan I had been secretly drafting for months. When the conversation turned to careers and ambitions, I found myself speaking up about my idea to start a digital marketing consultancy. The room fell silent in that particular way that makes your stomach drop. Then came the laughter. Not cruel exactly, but dismissive in a way that cut deeper than outright mockery. My husband Marcus looked at me with what I can only describe as amused patience, the way you might look at a child who just announced they want to be a dinosaur when they grow up. "Honey," he said, reaching over to pat my hand like I was having some sort of episode. "You can't be a CEO. You're just a girl who's good at organizing our social calendar. Leave the business stuff to people who understand it." His mother nodded, approvingly, adding that it was sweet how I had little hobbies, but that my real job was supporting Marcus through his demanding career in tech sales. His father chimed in about how successful businesses required a certain kind of aggressive mindset that women simply didn't possess naturally. I sat there, my cheeks burning, feeling smaller with each word. This was my family, the people who were supposed to believe in me, and they were collectively dismissing my potential like it was an inconvenient delusion. Marcus went on to explain to the table how challenging his work was, how he needed a wife who could handle the home front so he could focus on being the breadwinner. That night, lying in bed next to my snoring husband, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to argue with them. I wasn't going to defend my dreams or try to convince anyone of my capabilities. I was simply going to prove them wrong, quietly and completely. Before I go deeper into my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. If you've ever stood your ground when someone failed to see your worth, feel free to let me know below. And if these kinds of stories speak to you, you're welcome to follow the channel for more. That March evening started like any other family dinner at Marcus's parents' house. I had spent the afternoon preparing my famous lasagna, the one that always earned me compliments and made me feel useful in a family where I often felt like an outsider looking in. I remember choosing my outfit carefully that day, a navy blue dress that made me feel professional yet appropriate for a family gathering. I had no idea I was dressing for my own execution. The dining room was warm, with the golden light from the chandelier Marcus's mother was so proud of. Around the table sat the usual suspects: Marcus's parents, Robert and Patricia, his younger brother Jake with his new girlfriend, and his sister Amy with her husband. The conversation flowed easily through the first course, covering safe topics, like the weather, neighborhood gossip, and Jake's recent promotion at the bank. I had been working on my business plan for 3 months by then, staying up late after Marcus fell asleep, researching market trends and competition analysis. The idea had been growing in my mind like a seed finally finding the right soil. I had a marketing degree that I'd barely used since our wedding, and I could see so many small businesses struggling with their online presence. The digital marketing space was exploding, and I knew I had the skills and vision to build something meaningful. When Robert started talking about his golf buddy's son, who had just launched a successful startup, I saw my opening. My heart was pounding, but I felt this surge of courage that I rarely experienced in this house. I cleared my throat and began explaining my concept for a digital marketing consultancy that would specialize in helping local businesses build their online presence. I talked about the research I had done, the gap in the market I had identified, and the preliminary business model I had developed. For a few minutes, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. I was speaking with passion about something that mattered to me, something that could be mine. The silence that followed wasn't the thoughtful kind where people are processing what you've said. It was the awkward silence of adults trying to figure out how to respond to something they found fundamentally ridiculous. Patricia's eyebrows had risen so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. Jake was staring at his plate, like he wished he could crawl under it. Amy was exchanging glances with her husband that clearly said, "Can you believe this?" Then Marcus laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but it was worse somehow. It was the patronizing chuckle of someone who found my dreams endearing in their naivety. He reached over and took my hand in what I'm sure he thought was a sweet gesture, but his grip felt condescending. "Oh, Sylphie," he said, his voice dripping with that particular brand of masculine patience that makes women everywhere want to scream. "That's really cute, honey, but you can't be a CEO. You're just a girl who's good at organizing our social calendar and making sure I have clean shirts for work. Business isn't really your thing." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Just a girl." The phrase echoed in my head while Patricia nodded sagely and added, "Marcus is right, dear. You have such lovely domestic skills, and that's where your talents really shine. Men need women who can support them properly, not compete with them." Robert jumped in with his authoritative voice, the one he used when he wanted to settle a matter. Definitively. "Building a real business requires a certain kind of aggressive mindset, Sylphie. It's not personal. It's just biology. Women are naturally more nurturing, which is wonderful, but business is warfare. You need killer instincts." Marcus squeezed my hand again, his wedding ring clicking against mine. "Besides, sweetheart, my career is really taking off right now. I need you to be able to handle things at home so I can focus on closing deals and building my client base. That's how we build our future together, as a team with clearly defined roles." Amy, who had never worked a day outside the home since her wedding, nodded enthusiastically. "Sylphie, you're so lucky to have a husband who can provide for you. Most of us would kill for that security. Why would you want to stress yourself with all that business nonsense when you could focus on what really matters?" I sat there, my cheeks burning with humiliation, feeling like I was shrinking in my chair. These people, my family by marriage, were collectively dismissing not just my business idea, but my entire capacity for independent thought and achievement. They weren't just saying no to my plan. They were saying no to the possibility that I could be anything more than Marcus's helpful wife. The conversation moved on to safer topics, but I was no longer present. I mechanically served dessert, cleared plates, and made appropriate responses to questions. But inside I was reeling. I kept replaying Marcus's words. "You can't be a CEO. You're just a girl." The casual dismissal in his voice, the way he had reduced me to a supporting character in my own life. During the drive home, Marcus was in high spirits, talking about his father's praise for his recent sales numbers and his mother's suggestion that we start thinking about children soon. He seemed completely unaware that anything significant had happened at dinner. To him, the conversation had been a minor blip, quickly resolved by his reasonable explanation of reality. "You're not upset about earlier, are you?" he asked when he noticed my silence. "I wasn't trying to hurt your feelings. I just want you to be realistic about your strengths. You're amazing at what you do. Taking care of us, making our home beautiful, being the perfect wife. That's not nothing, Sylphie. That's everything." I told him I was fine, just tired. But inside, I was anything but fine. I was burning with a combination of rage and determination that I had never felt before. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Marcus's satisfied snoring, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I wasn't going to waste energy arguing with them or trying to convince anyone of my worth. I wasn't going to beg for permission or validation. I was going to build my business quietly, systematically, and successfully. And one day, Marcus would see exactly what this just a girl was capable of achieving. The breaking point had been reached, and there was no going back. The erosion of my identity didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, almost imperceptible process that unfolded over 7 years of marriage, like watching paint fade in sunlight. You don't notice it happening, until one day you realize the vibrant color you once loved has become a pale shadow of itself. When Marcus and I first met during my senior year of college, I was a different woman entirely. I was Sylphie Rodriguez, summa cum laude marketing major with a minor in business administration, president of the marketing club, and recipient of the Dean's Award for Academic Excellence. I had internship offers from 3 different advertising agencies and a 5-year plan that included climbing the corporate ladder, maybe starting my own firm by 30, and building a career that would make my immigrant parents proud. Marcus was charming in that confident way that successful men often are. He was already 3 years into his sales career, driving a BMW, wearing expensive suits, and talking about his ambitious plans to become a regional manager before he turned 30. When he asked me out, I felt flattered that someone so established would be interested in a college student still eating ramen noodles and studying in the library until midnight. Our early conversations were filled with talk about our respective careers and dreams. He seemed impressed by my academic achievements and said he loved dating a woman with ambition. I remember him telling his friends that he had found himself a real catch, beautiful and smart. Back then, the combination felt like a compliment, rather than a checklist of assets he was acquiring. The shift began subtly during our engagement. When I received a job offer from a prestigious marketing firm in the city, Marcus suggested I might want to consider something closer to home instead. "Think about our future," he said. "Long commutes and demanding hours aren't great for building a marriage. Maybe something more flexible would be better." He presented it as concern for our relationship, and because I loved him, I convinced myself he was being thoughtful rather than controlling. I took a position at a smaller local company for significantly less money and far fewer growth opportunities. Marcus praised my decision as mature and relationship-focused. His approval felt good in the moment, but I noticed the first small pang of regret when I saw my college friends posting about their exciting projects and rapid promotions while I was managing social media accounts for local restaurants and small retailers. After our wedding, the suggestions became more frequent and more pointed. When I expressed frustration about my limited role at the smaller firm, Marcus would remind me that my job was temporary anyway. "Once we start a family, you'll want to be home with the kids," he'd say. "No point in getting too invested in climbing some corporate ladder when your real career is going to be motherhood." His mother became an enthusiastic ally in this gradual reshaping of my ambitions. During family dinners, she would regale me with stories about the satisfaction she found in supporting Robert's career, how fulfilling it was to be the woman behind a successful man. "A smart woman knows that her husband's success is her success," she would say, nodding meaningfully. "The best wives are the ones who make their husbands look good." Slowly, I found myself adapting to fit their vision of who I should be. When Marcus came home stressed about work, I learned not to share my own professional frustrations. His problems were more important, more pressing, more worthy of our evening conversations. When his colleagues and their wives socialized, I became the woman who asked about everyone else's lives and rarely mentioned my own work. The marketing degree that had once been my pride became something I mentioned less and less frequently. When new acquaintances asked about my background, I started deflecting with questions about their careers instead. It felt easier than explaining why someone with my education was in such an underutilized position, easier than facing the pity or confusion in their eyes. Marcus began referring to my job as my little career, in a tone that suggested it was more of a hobby than a profession. When I brought home a successful campaign or received recognition from a client, his response was always the same measured enthusiasm he might show for a nice dinner I'd prepared. Pleased, but not particularly. Impressed, as if my achievements were pleasant, but ultimately inconsequential. The most insidious part was how I began to internalize his perspective. When opportunities for advancement arose, I found myself hesitating, wondering if I was really qualified, if I really had what it took to handle more responsibility. Marcus's constant reminders about my natural talents, organizing, nurturing, supporting, started to feel like the boundaries of my capabilities rather than just some of my strengths. I stopped reading industry publications and attending networking events. I let my professional relationships drift as I focused more on being the perfect wife who had dinner ready when Marcus came home, who remembered his mother's birthday and his boss's wife's name, who could host a dinner party that would make him look successful and well-supported. My college friends began to feel like reminders of a person I used to be. Their conversations about promotions, challenging projects, and career moves made me feel increasingly disconnected from the ambitious woman I had once been. I started declining invitations to their gatherings, telling myself I was too busy with my marriage and my responsibilities at home. The saddest part was how natural this transformation felt at the time. Each small compromise seemed reasonable, each adjustment logical. I told myself I was being a good wife, that I was choosing love over ambition, that there would be time later for my own dreams. Marcus's career was demanding, and someone needed to handle the emotional labor of our life together. By year 5 of our marriage, I had become exactly what his family had always expected me to be. The supportive wife who made Marcus's life easier and more pleasant. I was good at it too. I could throw dinner parties that impressed his colleagues, manage our social calendar with precision, and provide the kind of emotional support that allowed him to focus entirely on his professional goals. But late at night, when Marcus was asleep beside me, I sometimes found myself staring at the ceiling and remembering the woman who used to stay up until midnight working on marketing strategies, who dreamed of building something meaningful, who believed she could change the world one campaign at a time. That woman felt like a character from someone else's story, someone I used to know but had lost touch with completely. I had become an expert at living Marcus's version of my life, but I had almost forgotten what my own version might look like. D.E. Morning after that humiliating dinner, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. While Marcus showered and prepared for another day of being the important breadwinner, I sat at our kitchen table with my coffee and made a decision that would split my life into before and after. I was going to build my business, but I was going to do it in complete secrecy. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was about to become exactly the kind of deceptive wife that Marcus and his family would have condemned. But their dismissal had left me no choice. If they couldn't see my potential, I would have to prove it existed without their knowledge or permission. The thought both terrified and exhilarated me. I started by reclaiming the small home office that had become Marcus's storage space for golf equipment and old college textbooks. While he was at work, I cleared out a corner and set up what would become my command center. I told him I was finally organizing all our paperwork and financial documents, a lie that felt both necessary and liberating. He approved of this domestic project with the same patronizing smile that had become so familiar. My research phase began immediately. I spent every moment Marcus was out of the house studying the digital marketing landscape with the intensity of a detective solving a case. I analyzed successful consultancies, identified market gaps, and began developing service packages that could differentiate me from the competition. The woman who had been slowly disappearing over 7 years of marriage suddenly had a pulse again. The technical aspects came back to me more easily than I had expected. My marketing degree hadn't evaporated during my years of domestic focus. It had just been dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface. I taught myself the latest social media advertising platforms, studied Google Analytics until I could navigate it blindfolded, and immersed myself in content marketing strategies that hadn't existed when I was in college. The hardest part was managing the secrecy. Every online course I took, every webinar I attended, every industry article I read had to be carefully scheduled around Marcus's routine. I became an expert at quickly closing browser windows when I heard his key in the door, at explaining away the business books that arrived in Amazon packages as organizational guides for the house. When Marcus saw me working on my laptop in the evenings, he would smile indulgently and ask what I was playing around with now. I learned to give vague answers about updating our personal social media or researching vacation destinations. He seemed to find my computer time endearing in the same way he might find a hobby like knitting or scrapbooking, harmless and appropriately feminine. 3 weeks after that dinner, I was ready to take my first real step. I created a business website using a professional template and a domain name that felt both bold and terrifying to purchase. Seeing Sylphie Rodriguez Marketing Solutions live on the internet for the first time made my hands shake. I was no longer just dreaming, I was building. My first client came through a connection I had maintained from my old job. Maria, who owned a small bakery, needed help with her social media presence and basic digital advertising. She couldn't afford a big agency but was willing to pay a reasonable fee for someone who could help her reach more customers online. I quoted her a price that felt enormous to me but was actually quite modest for the industry. I was so hungry for that first validation that I would have done it for free. Working on Maria's account felt like coming alive after a long sleep. I created content calendars, designed graphics, and developed a social media strategy that increased her engagement by 300% in the first month. When she called to tell me that her weekend sales had doubled thanks to the Facebook ads I had set up, I cried in my car in the grocery store parking lot. Someone valued my work. Someone was paying me for my expertise. I was a business owner. The second client came through Maria's referral, a local accountant who needed help with his website and online presence. Then came a small law firm that wanted to improve their social media strategy. Each new client felt like a small miracle, proof that I had something valuable to offer the world beyond perfectly folded laundry and dinner party coordination. Managing client work while maintaining. My cover as the dutiful wife required skills I never knew I possessed. I took client calls from my car during grocery runs, worked on campaigns while Marcus played golf on weekends, and scheduled strategy sessions during his business trips. I became a master of efficiency, accomplishing in stolen hours what might have taken me days in a traditional office environment. The money started slowly but steadily. My first month I earned $800. The second month it was $1,200. By the third month, I was bringing in over $2,000, and I hadn't told a single person in my personal life about any of it. I opened a separate bank account that Marcus knew nothing about, watching the balance grow with a mixture of pride and disbelief. The psychological impact was even more significant than the financial one. Every successful campaign, every satisfied client, every positive review was rebuilding the confidence that had been systematically eroded over years of being told I was just a girl with cute ideas. I was remembering who I used to be and discovering who I could become. But the secrecy was exhausting. I lived in constant fear of discovery, carefully managing my digital footprint to avoid leaving traces that Marcus might stumble upon. I used a separate phone number for business calls, maintained client communications through a dedicated email account, and even set up a P.O. box for business mail. I felt like I was leading a double life, which in many ways I was. The closest I came to getting caught was during a client video call that ran longer than expected. I was in our bedroom, discussing a rebranding strategy with a restaurant owner, when I heard Marcus's car in the driveway 30 minutes earlier than usual. I had to end the call abruptly, claiming a family emergency, and pretend to be organizing closets when he walked in. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "What are you up to?" he asked, loosening his tie and surveying the clothes I had frantically pulled out to create evidence of domestic activity. "Just doing some spring cleaning," I replied, amazed by how steady my voice sounded. "You know how I like to keep things organized." He kissed my forehead with that familiar, patronizing affection. "That's my girl, always keeping our home perfect." If only he knew that his girl had just finished planning a $10,000 marketing campaign and was on track to earn more than his monthly salary by the end of the quarter. But he couldn't know. Not yet. I wasn't ready for that confrontation, and my business wasn't strong enough to survive the chaos that revelation would inevitably bring. As I folded shirts and hung dresses that night, I smiled to myself. Marcus thought I was playing house, but I was actually building an empire. One secret client at a time. The foundation was getting stronger every day, and soon it would be strong enough to support the truth. 6 months into my secret business venture, I had become a master of deception, and the weight of that realization both thrilled and haunted me. During the day, I was Sylphie the devoted wife, preparing Marcus's breakfast, managing our social calendar, and playing the role that had been carefully crafted for me over 7 years. But in the shadows of that performance, I was building something that would have shocked everyone who thought they knew me. My client roster had grown to 12 businesses, ranging from local restaurants to professional services. What had started as a desperate attempt to prove my worth had evolved into a legitimate consultancy that was generating more revenue than I had ever imagined possible. The irony was intoxicating. While Marcus pontificated about business strategy at dinner parties, I was actually implementing sophisticated marketing campaigns that were transforming my clients' bottom lines. The logistics of maintaining this double life required a level of organizational skill that would have impressed even Patricia. I had developed an intricate system of alibis and cover stories that allowed me to conduct business while appearing to fulfill my wifely duties. Client. Meetings happened during grocery runs or while Marcus was at the gym. Strategy sessions were disguised as coffee dates with friends he had never met. Late-night work sessions were explained away as insomnia or organizing photos on my computer. My phone had become a carefully managed communication device with 2 separate personalities. Personal calls and texts occupied the main screen that Marcus might glimpse while all business communications were routed through apps he didn't know existed. I had learned to switch between contexts so seamlessly that sometimes I forgot which version of myself I was supposed to be at any given moment. The closest call came on a Tuesday afternoon, when Marcus decided to come home early with a migraine. I was in the middle of a crucial presentation via video call with a potential client, a mid-sized law firm that represented exactly the kind of account that could take my business to the next level. When I heard his key in the door, my heart stopped, but my professional instincts kicked in with surprising efficiency. "I'm so sorry," I told the managing partner on the screen, "but I need to reschedule this presentation due to an unexpected family situation. Could we continue this tomorrow at the same time?" The disappointment in his voice was painful, but not as painful as the thought of Marcus discovering my secret before I was ready. I managed to end the call and close my laptop just as Marcus walked into our bedroom, looking pale and exhausted. "Hey, sweetheart," he mumbled, heading straight for the bed. "Can you close the curtains? This headache is killing me." As I darkened the room and brought him water and aspirin, I realized I had been holding my breath for what felt like minutes. The law firm presentation had to be rescheduled twice more due to similar near misses, but eventually I secured the contract. It was worth $35,000 over 6 months, more money than I had ever seen attached to my own name. The financial success was intoxicating, but it was the psychological transformation that truly amazed me. Every successful campaign restored a piece of the confidence that had been systematically dismantled during my marriage. When clients praised my strategic thinking or credited my work with significant business growth, I felt like I was remembering a language I had once spoken fluently, but had been forced to forget. By month 8, My monthly income had quietly surpassed Marcus's salary. The realization hit me while I was reviewing my business account statements in my car outside the bank. I sat there for 20 minutes, staring at numbers that represented more than financial success. They represented proof that everything Marcus and his family believed about my capabilities was fundamentally wrong. The temptation to reveal my success grew stronger every day, especially during family gatherings where I had to endure continued commentary about my cute hobbies and lack of real-world experience. When Robert launched into one of his lectures about business being too complex for most women to understand, I had to physically bite my tongue to keep from describing the multi-platform marketing campaign I had just designed for a client's product launch. The psychological strain of living two lives was considerable. I found myself analyzing every interaction, every conversation, every casual comment for potential threats to my secret. When Marcus mentioned that I seemed more confident lately, I panicked for days, wondering if I was unconsciously revealing too much of my professional self in our personal interactions. Sleep became elusive as my mind raced between the demands of my growing business and the careful maintenance of my domestic facade. I would lie awake at night, mentally reviewing client projects while listening to Marcus's satisfied snoring, marveling at how completely unaware he was of the transformation happening right beside him. The isolation was perhaps the most difficult aspect of this double life. I had no one to celebrate my victories with, no one to share my fears and frustrations about the challenges of entrepreneurship. When I landed my biggest client yet, a regional chain looking to completely revamp their digital presence, I had to contain my excitement to a private celebration in my car with takeout coffee and a playlist of empowering songs. Social interactions became increasingly surreal. At dinner parties, I would listen to Marcus and his colleagues discuss business strategies that I was actually implementing with greater sophistication and success than they realized. When they made pronouncements about market trends or consumer behavior, I often had real data from my own campaigns that contradicted their assumptions, but I had to nod along as if their theoretical knowledge was superior to my practical experience. The deception was becoming easier, which worried me almost as much as the fear of being caught had initially. I was developing skills in compartmentalization and emotional management that felt both necessary and dangerous. Part of me wondered what kind of person I was becoming, someone capable of maintaining such an elaborate fiction with the person who was supposed to be my closest partner. But another part of me felt more authentic than I had in years. The professional, Sylphie who emerged during client calls and strategy sessions felt more real than the domestic Sylphie who folded Marcus's shirts and asked about his day. I was beginning to understand that the person I had become in my marriage wasn't my true self. It was a carefully constructed performance designed to meet other people's expectations. My business was thriving, my confidence was growing, and my bank account was proof that I had valuable skills and expertise. But I was also living a lie that was becoming more complex and more emotionally exhausting every day. I knew that this double life couldn't continue indefinitely, but I wasn't ready for the confrontation that honesty would inevitably bring. The foundation I was building in secret was getting stronger, but so was the wall between who I appeared to be and who I actually was becoming. The call came on a Thursday morning in November, while I was reviewing quarterly reports for my consulting business. Marcus had been at work for less than 2 hours when his name flashed across my phone screen. I almost didn't answer. I was deep in analysis mode, preparing for a major client presentation, but something about the timing felt wrong. Sylphie? His voice was hollow, unfamiliar. I need you to come pick me up. What's wrong? Are you sick? There was a long pause, filled with the kind of silence that signals the end of something important. They let me go. Budget cuts. Effective immediately. The drive to his office building felt surreal. Marcus had been so confident in his position, so certain of his value to the company. He had spent years building what he believed was an unshakable career foundation, often reminding me how fortunate I was to have such a stable provider. Now, as I pulled up to see him standing on the sidewalk with a cardboard box of personal belongings, that foundation looked as fragile as everything else in our carefully constructed life. He didn't speak during the 20-minute drive home. When we pulled into our driveway, he sat in the passenger seat for several minutes, staring at our house like he'd never seen it before. 15 years with that company, he finally said. 15 years, and they gave me 30 minutes to pack up my desk. What followed was the most difficult 3 months of our marriage. Marcus spiraled into a depression that seemed to consume not just his confidence, but his entire sense of identity. The man who had always been so certain about everything, my limitations, women's roles, the natural order of successful relationships, suddenly couldn't get out of bed before noon or make it through a day without several drinks. I found myself carrying the emotional weight of our household in ways I had never anticipated. While secretly managing my growing business, I also became Marcus's primary source of support, encouragement, and practical assistance with his job search. The irony was exhausting. I was succeeding professionally while pretending to be just a wife, while simultaneously supporting a husband whose professional identity had completely collapsed. His job search efforts were sporadic and increasingly desperate. The confident salesman who had once dismissed my dreams was now struggling to articulate his own value to potential employers. Rejection letters piled up, interviews went poorly, and his savings account dwindled while mine grew exponentially. The role reversal was so complete it felt like we were living in some kind of alternate reality. During this period, my business exploded. Word-of-mouth referrals had created a waiting list of potential clients, and I had just secured a contract with a major regional retailer that would double my annual revenue. I was working longer hours than ever before, but I had to disguise my professional success as domestic busy work or volunteer activities to avoid drawing attention to my actual productivity. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in February. I was in our home office, participating in a video conference with a client's executive team about their upcoming product launch campaign. It was a crucial strategy session that would determine the direction of a 6-figure marketing budget, and I was presenting research and recommendations that had taken weeks to develop. I thought Marcus was asleep. He had been napping increasingly during the afternoon hours, and I had learned to schedule important calls during these windows. But as I was explaining the demographic analysis that would guide our social media strategy, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Before I could react, the office door opened. Marcus stood in the doorway, hair disheveled from sleep, staring at my laptop screen where I was clearly visible in a professional video call with several people in business attire. The expression on his face shifted from confusion to recognition to something that looked like horror. "I'm sorry," I told the client team, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it through the microphone. "I need to handle an urgent personal matter. Could we resume this call in 30 minutes? After ending the call, I turned to face Marcus. He was still standing in the doorway, but his expression had hardened into something I had never seen before. "What the hell was that, Sylphie?" There was no point in lying anymore. The carefully constructed wall between my two lives had just crumbled completely. "It was a client meeting. For my business." "Your business?" His voice was rising, and I could see his hands starting to shake. Whether from anger or shock, I couldn't tell. "What business? What are you talking about?" I explained everything as calmly as I could manage. The consultancy I had been building for over a year, the clients I had been serving, the revenue I had been generating. With each detail, Marcus's face grew redder, his breathing more labored. When I mentioned the scope of my client base and the contracts I had secured, he actually took a step backward as if I had physically struck him. "You've been lying to me for over a year?" The accusation hung in the air between us. "You've been running some secret business while I've been killing myself trying to find work?" "Marcus, how much money are you making?" His question was quiet, but there was something dangerous in his tone. I hesitated, knowing that this answer would change everything irreversibly. About 8,000 a month on average, more during busy periods. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's salary, when he had been employed, was roughly $6,000 monthly. His face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, calculation, recognition, and finally, rage. $8,000. He was shouting now, his voice cracking with emotion. You've been making more money than I was, and you let me feel like a failure? You let me think I was the only one responsible for supporting us? I wanted to tell you, but after that dinner at your parents' house, don't you dare blame my family for your deception. He was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. You made me feel like I was the only adult in this relationship, while you were apparently running some kind of empire behind my back. The word empire struck me as particularly ironic, given how hard I had worked to keep my success small and invisible. But I could see that Marcus felt betrayed in a way that went beyond the secrecy. His entire understanding of our relationship, of his role as the provider and decision-maker, had been demolished in a single conversation. Do you have any idea what this does to me? He continued, his voice now a mixture of anger and something that sounded like grief. I've been feeling like a failure for months, like I couldn't take care of my own wife. And all this time you've been secretly more successful than I ever was? Marcus, I never wanted you to feel like a failure. I just wanted to prove that I could do this. Prove it to who? To me? To my family? By making me look like an idiot who doesn't even know what his own wife is doing all day? He stopped pacing and stared at me with an expression I had never seen before. How many other people know about this business? How many people have been laughing behind my back while I talked about being the breadwinner? The questions kept coming, each one revealing another layer of his humiliation and anger. He felt emasculated, betrayed, and completely blindsided by the revelation that his quiet, supportive wife had been building a successful business while he struggled with unemployment and depression. You've made me into a joke, Sylphie. The husband who doesn't even know his wife is making twice his salary while he sits around feeling sorry for himself. His voice was quieter now, but somehow more devastating. How am I supposed to come back from this? How am I supposed to look at myself in the mirror, knowing that you've been taking care of everything while pretending I was in charge? As I watched my husband grapple with the complete destruction of his self-image, I realized that my moment of truth had arrived much sooner and more dramatically than I had ever anticipated. The 48 hours following Marcus's discovery of my business were the longest of my life. He barely spoke to me, moving through our house like a wounded animal, alternating between periods of silent brooding and explosive outbursts about my betrayal and deception. I could see him processing not just the revelation of my business, but everything it implied about our marriage, his assumptions about me, and his own sense of identity. On Saturday morning, he finally broke his silence with a pronouncement that felt like a judgment handed down from some invisible court. We need to talk, really talk, about what happens next. I found him in our living room, sitting in his leather chair with the kind of rigid posture that suggested he had been rehearsing this conversation. On the coffee table in front of him were printed pages, screenshots of my business website, my LinkedIn profile that I had carefully kept hidden from our social circles, and what appeared to be a rough calculation of my earnings based on the information he had been able to piece together. I've been thinking about this situation all night, he began, his voice carrying the formal tone he used for important business negotiations. And I think I understand what happened here. You got caught up in some kind of fantasy about being a businesswoman, and instead of talking to me about it like a wife should, you decided to sneak around behind my back. I started to respond, but he held up his hand to stop me. This was clearly going to be a monologue, not a conversation. I can see how it happened, he continued, his tone becoming almost therapeutic, as if he was diagnosing a psychological condition. I was focused on my career. Maybe I wasn't giving you enough attention or appreciation for what you do at home. So you created this whole elaborate fantasy world where you're some kind of successful consultant. The condescension in his voice was breathtaking. Even faced with concrete evidence of my professional success, he was still unable to accept it as real. In his mind, my business wasn't a legitimate achievement. It was a symptom of neglect, a cry for attention that had gotten out of hand. "But Sylphie, this has to stop. Now." His voice hardened, and I could see the man who had dismissed my dreams at that family dinner reasserting himself. "I'm going through the most difficult period of my career, and I need to know that my wife is focused on supporting me, not playing entrepreneur." The word playing hit me like a physical slap. I had built a business that was generating more revenue than his previous job, had developed a client base that trusted my expertise, had created something valuable and sustainable from nothing. But in his mind, it was still just playing. "I need you to shut down this business," he said, looking directly at me for the first time since he had discovered my secret. "Cancel the contracts, refer your clients to other consultants, and focus on what really matters, helping me get back on track professionally." I felt something crack inside my chest. "Marcus, you can't be serious. This business is successful. It's bringing in substantial income. It's a distraction from your real responsibilities," he interrupted. "And frankly, it's embarrassing. Do you know how this looks? My wife secretly running some business while I'm unemployed? What does that say about me as a husband and provider?" There it was. The heart of his objection wasn't about my deception or even about trust. It was about his image, his ego, his need to maintain the fiction that he was the capable breadwinner and I was the supportive wife. My success wasn't just inconvenient, it was a direct threat to his sense of masculine identity. "Look," he said, his tone softening slightly. "I get that you enjoyed this little adventure. And maybe, once I'm back on my feet and we're in a stable place again, we can talk about you doing some part-time consulting or something. But right now, I need my wife back. I need you focused on us, on our future, not on these clients who don't even know the real you." The phrase "the real you" echoed in my mind. Who did he think was the real me? The woman who had been slowly disappearing over 7 years of marriage? Or the woman who had built something meaningful and successful from nothing? The woman who asked permission to have opinions? Or the woman who had been making strategic business decisions that affected multiple companies and their employees? "This ultimatum isn't fair, Marcus," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "This business isn't a hobby or a phase. It's a legitimate career that I've built through hard work and skill." "It's a career built on lies," he shot back. "Every client meeting you took while pretending to go grocery shopping, every contract you signed while I thought you were organizing closets, it's all built on deception. How can you even feel good about success that required you to lie to your own husband?" The accusation stung because there was truth in it. I had built my business in secret, and that secrecy had required countless small deceptions. But I also knew why those lies had been necessary. I had tried honesty first at that family dinner and been dismissed completely. "I lied because you made it clear that you would never support this," I said. "You told me I couldn't be a CEO because I'm just a girl. You made it impossible for me to pursue this dream with your knowledge or blessing. So instead of accepting my guidance as your husband, you decided to prove me wrong by going behind." "My back?" His voice was rising again. "Sylphie, marriage is a partnership. It requires communication and mutual decision-making. You can't just unilaterally decide to start a business without discussing it with your spouse." I found myself caught between two versions of myself, the woman I had been trained to be and the woman I had discovered I could become. The trained version wanted to apologize, to shut down the business, to focus on being the supportive wife, who helped Marcus rebuild his confidence and find a new job. That version understood his point about partnership and communication, felt guilty about the deception, and wanted to prioritize our marriage above my professional ambitions. But the woman I had become over the past year, the entrepreneur who had built something valuable, who had proven her capabilities in the marketplace, who had rediscovered her own worth. That woman was horrified by the idea of dismantling everything she had created to soothe her husband's wounded ego. "You're asking me to give up something I've worked incredibly hard to build," I said. "This business isn't just about money. It's about proving to myself that I'm capable of more than you've ever believed I could do." "And I'm asking you to be my wife," he replied, "to support your husband during the most difficult period of his life instead of competing with him. Sylphie, I can't rebuild my career while feeling like I'm failing in comparison to your secret business empire. It's emasculating and it's destroying our marriage." The word emasculating hung in the air between us. There it was, the core issue that had nothing to do with partnership or communication or trust. My success made him feel like less of a man, and he needed me to be less successful in order to feel better about himself. "I'm giving you a choice," he said, standing up from his chair with an air of finality. "The business or the marriage. You can't have both, Sylphie. Choose." As I sat there, looking at the man I had spent 7 years of my life trying to please, I realized that he was asking me to choose between the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. And for the first time since that humiliating dinner, I knew exactly what my answer would be. The silence after Marcus's ultimatum stretched between us like a chasm that had been widening for years without either of us realizing it. I looked at this man I had shared a bed with for 7 years, had planned a future with, had molded myself around, and I saw a stranger. Not because he had changed, but because I finally understood who he had always been, and who I had never been allowed to become in his presence. "I choose my business," I said quietly. The words felt both terrifying and inevitable, like stepping off a cliff I had been approaching for months without knowing it. The expression that crossed Marcus's face was one I will never forget. It moved from confidence to confusion to disbelief in a matter of seconds. He had been so certain that when forced to choose, I would revert to the compliant wife who had always prioritized his needs over her own dreams. "You can't be serious," he said, sitting back down heavily. "Sylphie, this is our marriage we're talking about. 7 years together, our home, our future, our whole life." "Our life?" I asked, feeling a strange calmness settling over me. "Marcus, in our life, I've been disappearing piece by piece for years. The woman you fell in love with in college had ambitions and dreams and opinions. The woman you've been married to has been a carefully edited version designed to make you comfortable." He stared at me as if I was speaking a foreign language. "I don't understand. You've always seemed happy. You never complained about anything." "Because complaining wasn't allowed," I replied. "Every time I expressed frustration about my career or wanted to discuss my professional goals, you redirected the conversation to your needs, your challenges, your timeline for our future. I learned to stop bringing it up." The conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever had in our marriage. For the first time, I spoke honestly about how small I had felt, how dismissed, how invisible. I told him about the dreams I had buried, the confidence I had lost, and the slow erosion of my identity that had left me feeling like a supporting character in my own life. Marcus listened with increasing agitation, occasionally interrupting, with defensive explanations about his intentions or his family's traditional values. But I could see that my words were penetrating his understanding in a way that was clearly uncomfortable for him. "So what are you saying?" he asked when I finished. "That you want a divorce?" "I'm saying that I can't go back to being the person I was before I started this business. And you've made it clear that you can't accept the person I've become. We've reached an impasse that feels insurmountable." The practical arrangements of separation happened with a surreal efficiency that surprised both of us. I had been managing our finances carefully throughout my business building period, so I knew exactly what assets we shared and what debts we had accumulated. The conversation about dividing our life felt like a business negotiation, which seemed fitting given that our fundamental disagreement was about my right to have a business at all. I found a furnished apartment across town within 3 days. It was small, but bright, with a second bedroom that would serve perfectly as a home office. As I signed the lease, I felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration that reminded me of the night I had first decided to build my business in secret. Moving out was emotionally brutal. Each box I packed felt like a small funeral for the life I had thought we were building together. Marcus alternated between sullen silence and desperate attempts to convince me that I was making a terrible mistake. He seemed genuinely unable to understand why I would choose uncertainty and potential failure over the security of our marriage. "You're throwing away everything we've built for some fantasy about being a businesswoman," he said as I loaded my car with the last of my belongings. "What happens when this consulting thing doesn't work out? What happens when you realize you need the stability that marriage provides?" I looked at him standing in the doorway of the house we had shared, and I felt sad for both of us. He couldn't see that his version of stability had required my professional death, and I couldn't make him understand that what he called security had felt like suffocation. "Marcus, my business has been more successful than your job was," I said gently. "I'm not choosing fantasy over reality. I'm choosing a reality you refuse to acknowledge." The first weeks in my new apartment were simultaneously lonely and liberating. For the first time in years, I could work openly, take client calls without hiding, and display my business achievements without apology. I set up my home office with the kind of professional equipment I had always wanted, but couldn't justify while pretending my work was just a hobby. But the emotional adjustment was complicated. I would catch myself listening for Marcus's key in, the door, or automatically cooking dinner for two. The habits of 7 years don't disappear overnight, and there were moments when the weight of what I had given up felt crushing. Marcus called frequently during those first weeks, his tone cycling between anger, confusion, and something that sounded increasingly like panic. I began to understand that his opposition to my business wasn't just about ego or traditional gender roles. It was about control and predictability. He had built his identity around being the provider and decision-maker, and my financial independence threatened the foundation of how he understood himself and our relationship. "Sylphie, this is insane," he said during one late-night phone call, his voice slurred with alcohol. "You're destroying our marriage over some clients who don't even know you. These business relationships aren't real. They're just transactions. What we have is real." But as I looked around my new office at the client testimonials on my wall and the project timelines covering my desk, I realized that he was wrong. My business relationships were based on my skills, my results, and my professional value. They were some of the most honest relationships I had ever had, built on what I could contribute rather than how well I could support someone else's agenda. The woman who had left that marriage was not the same woman who had entered it 7 years earlier. That woman had been willing to make herself smaller to fit into someone else's vision of what she should be. This woman had learned that she was capable of building something significant, valuable, and entirely her own. 3 months after moving out, I received a text from Marcus that was different from his usual attempts at reconciliation. "I saw your website," it said. "I looked up some of your clients. I never realized how big this actually was." I didn't respond immediately. The recognition I had craved for so long had finally come, but it was too late to change the fundamental incompatibility that had ended our marriage. He had needed me to be small for him to feel big. I had needed to be myself to feel alive. The choice had been difficult, but it had never really been a choice at all. The 18 months following my separation from Marcus transformed my small, consulting business into something I had never dared to imagine during those secret late-night planning sessions. What had begun as a desperate attempt to prove my worth evolved into a legitimate marketing agency with a growing reputation and a client roster that included some of the most respected businesses in our region. The growth wasn't accidental. It was the result of focused strategy and relentless execution. Once I no longer had to hide my professional activities, I could pursue opportunities that had been impossible during my double life. I joined professional organizations, attended networking, events, and began speaking at marketing conferences about digital strategy for small and medium businesses. Each public appearance felt like stepping further into the light after years of hiding in shadows. My first major breakthrough came 6 months after moving into my apartment. A regional restaurant chain that had been struggling with declining. Foot traffic reached out after seeing my presentation on local digital marketing at a Chamber of Commerce event. They needed a complete overhaul of their brand positioning and digital presence across 12 locations. The contract was worth more than I had earned in my entire first year of business. The success of that campaign created a ripple effect that exceeded my most optimistic projections. Within 3 months, I had inquiries from other restaurant groups, retail chains, and service businesses throughout the region. Word-of-mouth referrals were generating more opportunities than I could handle as a solo practitioner, which led to the most terrifying and exciting decision of my entrepreneurial journey: hiring my first employee. Finding the right person to join my agency felt like a monumental responsibility. I was no longer just responsible for my own success. I was creating opportunities for others and building something larger than myself. After weeks of interviews, I hired Jessica, a recent IA marketing graduate with a combination of creative talent and analytical skills that reminded me of my younger self. Watching her excitement about joining the team made me realize how far I had come from the woman who had once been told she couldn't be a CEO. The transition from solo consultant to agency owner required skills I hadn't anticipated needing. I had to learn about employment law, benefits administration, project management systems, and team leadership. Each challenge felt like a test of whether I truly belonged in the role I had claimed for myself. But mastering these new competencies reinforced my confidence in ways that client successes alone couldn't accomplish. By the end of my first year, as an agency, we had grown to 4 employees and moved into a proper office space, a bright, modern suite in a professional building that felt like the physical manifestation of dreams I had carried since college. The day we hung our company sign on the front door, I stood on the sidewalk taking pictures and crying tears of joy that I couldn't have explained to anyone who hadn't lived through the journey from secret shame to public success. The financial growth was equally remarkable. My personal income had increased by 400% since leaving Marcus, but more importantly, I was creating value for multiple families through the jobs I was providing and the business growth I was generating for clients. The woman who had once been dismissed as just a girl was now responsible for marketing budgets that influenced the success of dozens of businesses and the livelihoods of hundreds of employees. The irony of my success wasn't lost on me, especially during the periods when I would catch glimpses of Marcus's ongoing struggles through mutual friends and social media. While I was building something substantial and sustainable, he was cycling through a series of temporary positions and contract work that never seemed to provide the security or satisfaction he was seeking. I learned through a former colleague that he had been fired from 2 different sales positions during his first year of post-divorce employment. The feedback consistently centered on issues with attitude and an apparent inability to work effectively. Within team structures, criticisms that suggested his professional struggles might be connected to the same ego and control issues that had destroyed our marriage. There were moments when I felt genuinely sad for him, particularly when I heard that he had moved back in with his parents after being unable to maintain the mortgage on our former house. The man who had been so concerned about appearing successful and maintaining his image as a provider was now living in his childhood bedroom while his ex-wife built an increasingly visible business empire. But my sympathy was complicated by the memory of how completely he had dismissed my potential and how willing he had been to sacrifice my dreams for his comfort. During my second year of agency operations, when I was featured in a local business magazine as Entrepreneur of the Year, I wondered if he had seen the article and what he thought about the photograph of me standing in my office surrounded by my team. The success brought challenges I hadn't anticipated. Managing employees required emotional intelligence and leadership skills that I had to develop on the job. There were difficult conversations about performance, strategic disagreements with clients, and the constant pressure of being responsible for other people's paychecks and professional development. I also had to navigate the complex dynamics of being a young woman leading a business in a region where female CEOs were still relatively uncommon. Some clients initially assumed that Jessica or one of my other team members was the decision maker, and I had to learn how to establish my authority without becoming defensive or apologetic about my role. The most satisfying aspect of building the agency was watching my team members grow and succeed. When Jessica was promoted to creative director after developing an award-winning campaign for one of our retail clients, I felt proud in a way that was different from any personal achievement. I was creating opportunities for other talented women to build careers and develop skills in an environment that valued their contributions. During my second year, we expanded our services to include web development and social media management, which required hiring specialists in those areas. Each new team member brought different perspectives and capabilities that strengthened our overall offering and allowed us to serve clients more comprehensively. The agency's reputation continued to grow through a combination of excellent results and strategic networking. I was invited to serve on the board of the local Chamber of Commerce and began mentoring other women entrepreneurs through a regional small business development program. These activities felt like natural extensions of my core mission, proving that women could build successful businesses and supporting other women who were fighting similar battles for recognition and respect. By the end of my second year, we had 15 employees and had moved into a larger office space with conference rooms, a creative studio, and a break room that had become the heart of our company culture. The walls were covered with client success stories, team achievements, and awards that represented not just business growth, but the validation of every risk I had taken to get to this point. The financial metrics were impressive. Annual revenue had grown to over $2 million, and we were projecting continued expansion for the following year. But the personal transformation was even more significant. I had evolved from a woman who apologized for having opinions to a leader who made confident decisions affecting multiple businesses and dozens of employees. There were still moments of imposter syndrome, particularly when I was presenting to large corporate clients or speaking at industry conferences. But those moments were balanced by increasing evidence that I belonged in these professional settings, and that my expertise was valued by people who had no obligation to flatter or placate me. The woman who had once hidden her business activities in stolen hours and secret phone calls was now being quoted in trade publications and invited to share her insights on panels about entrepreneurship and women in business. The contrast between my current professional visibility and my former secrecy sometimes felt so dramatic that it seemed like I was living someone else's life. But this life was authentically mine, built through my own decisions, sustained by my own capabilities, and directed toward goals that reflected my own values and ambitions. The empire I had constructed was more than a successful business. It was proof that the dreams I had been told to abandon were actually the foundation of who I was meant to become. 2.5 years after our divorce was finalized, I was reviewing resumes for a senior account manager position when I saw a name that made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. Marcus Thompson. There it was, printed in professional Times New Roman font on cream-colored paper, as if the universe had decided to test just how far I had truly come in my journey toward emotional equilibrium. My first instinct was to laugh, the kind of incredulous laughter that erupts when reality becomes so absurd it feels fictional. Marcus had applied to work at my company without realizing I was the CEO. The irony was so complete it felt like something out of a satirical novel about corporate America and failed marriages. I set his resume aside and tried to continue reviewing the other candidates, but my eyes kept drifting back to that familiar name. According to the application, he had been working as a freelance sales consultant for the past 18 months after a series of short-term positions that painted a picture of professional instability. His employment history showed exactly the kind of career trajectory that I had feared for myself during those early days of secret business building. Scattered, inconsistent, lacking the momentum that comes from sustained success. But as I read through his qualifications more objectively, I had to admit that his background was solid. 15 years of sales experience, a proven track record with B2B clients, and familiarity with CRM systems that our agency used. If his name had been anything other than Marcus Thompson, he would have been a strong candidate for the position. Jessica knocked on my office door while I was still staring at his resume, bringing in the coffee I had requested an hour earlier. "Everything okay, Sylphie? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," I replied, handing her Marcus's application. "What do you think of this candidate?" She scanned the resume with the same analytical attention she brought to client campaigns. Strong experience, relevant background. The employment gaps are concerning, but his references look solid. Want me to schedule a phone screening? I found myself in the surreal position of having to explain to my creative director that the applicant was my ex-husband without making the decision seem personal or unprofessional. "This is complicated. This is Marcus, my ex-husband." Jessica's eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. "The one who told you that you couldn't be a CEO because you're just a girl?" "That's the one." The phrase still stung, even after all this time and success. "He doesn't know I own this company. He applied through our website like any other candidate." Oh my God. Jessica sat down across from my desk, the resume still in her hands. "What are you going to do?" That question occupied my thoughts for the next 3 days. Part of me wanted to reject his application immediately, not out of spite, but because the emotional complications of working with my ex-husband seemed like an unnecessary burden for a thriving business. I had built this company as a space where I could be completely authentic and professionally confident, and Marcus's presence would inevitably complicate that dynamic. But another part of me was curious about what kind of employee he would be, how he would handle working for the woman he had once dismissed so completely. There was also a practical consideration. We genuinely needed a senior account manager, and despite our personal history, Marcus did have the qualifications we were seeking. I discussed the situation with my business mentor, Sarah Chen, during our monthly coffee meeting. Sarah had been invaluable during my early entrepreneurial days, and her perspective had helped me navigate numerous professional challenges. Her advice was characteristically direct. Hire based on qualifications and company needs, not personal history. If he's the best candidate, interview him. If he's not, don't. But make the decision based on business criteria, not emotional ones. After consulting with my leadership team and considering the potential implications, I decided to include Marcus in our interview process. However, I structured it so that he would initially interview with Jessica and our operations manager, David Kim, before meeting with me. This would allow us to evaluate his professional capabilities before the personal complications entered the equation. The day of his first interview, I watched from my office window as Marcus walked across the parking lot toward our building. He looked older, more worn down than I remembered, and there was something in his posture that suggested the confidence he had once worn so easily had been significantly diminished. He was wearing a suit that I recognized from our marriage. Apparently, his professional wardrobe hadn't been updated in several years. Jessica and David's feedback after the initial interview was cautiously positive. "He knows his stuff," Jessica reported. "Good understanding of sales processes, solid communication skills, and he seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the position. But there's something subdued about him, like he's trying really hard to make a good impression," David added. His references checked out well. Previous supervisors said he was knowledgeable and hardworking, though a couple mentioned that he could be difficult to manage at times. Overall, he seems like he could handle the technical aspects of the job. Based on their assessment, we moved forward with scheduling the final interview, with me. I debated whether to tell Marcus in advance that I was the CEO, but ultimately decided that his authentic reaction to the surprise would be more revealing than a prepared response. The morning of our interview, I dressed carefully in a navy blue blazer and white blouse, professional but not ostentatious. I wanted to look successful without appearing to be making a statement about my achievements. When my assistant buzzed to let me know that Marcus had arrived, I took a deep breath and prepared for what might be the most surreal job interview in corporate history. Marcus walked into my office carrying a leather portfolio that I remembered from our marriage, his expression shifting from professional pleasantness to complete shock in the span of 2 seconds. He stopped walking mid-step, his mouth slightly open, staring at me behind my executive desk as if I was an optical illusion that might disappear if he blinked hard enough. "Sylphie?" His voice was barely above a whisper. You're the CEO?" "I am," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Please, have a seat. Thank you for coming in today." He sat down slowly, his eyes scanning my office. The awards on the walls, the client photos, the company organizational chart that clearly showed my name at the top. I could see him trying to process not just my role, but the scope and success of the business he had unknowingly applied to join. "I had no idea," he said, still looking around the office as if searching for evidence that this was some kind of elaborate prank. "When I applied online, I researched the company, but I didn't realize that your ex-wife was the just a girl who built this business?" I asked, keeping my tone professional, but allowing just a hint of the irony to show through. The phrase hung in the air between us, and I watched him remember the moment that had changed everything between us. His face flushed with what looked like a combination of embarrassment and recognition. "Sylphie, I don't know what to say." He was gripping his portfolio so tightly his knuckles were white. "This is incredible, what you've built here. It's exactly what you always said you wanted to do." "Yes," I replied simply. "It is." Despite the surreal circumstances of our interview, I decided to hire Marcus. His qualifications genuinely matched our needs, and after extensive discussion, with my leadership team, we agreed that allowing personal history to override professional merit would set a dangerous precedent for our company culture. I offered him the position of senior account manager with clear reporting structures and professional boundaries that would minimize our direct interaction while allowing him to contribute meaningfully to our clients' success. His first day at Sylphie Rodriguez Marketing Solutions was awkward in ways that no corporate training manual could have prepared me for. I watched from my office window as he walked across the parking lot, carrying the same black messenger bag he had used during our marriage, toward a building where his ex-wife's name was prominently displayed on the directory and company signage. The poetic justice was not lost on me, though I tried to approach the situation with as much professionalism as I could muster. During the new employee orientation, I observed Marcus from the back of the conference room as Jessica walked him and 2 other new hires through our company history, values, and operational procedures. When she reached the slide about our founding story, how the company had grown from a solo consulting practice to a full-service agency, I saw him shift uncomfortably in his chair. He was hearing the official version of what I had been building, in secret during the final year of our marriage, and I could see him processing the timeline with visible discomfort. The organizational structure that placed Marcus under David Kim's direct supervision while keeping him several layers removed from my daily operations worked exactly as intended. Most days, we barely interacted beyond polite greetings in the hallway or brief acknowledgments during all-hands meetings. But the awareness of his presence in the building created a constant undercurrent of strangeness that I hadn't fully anticipated. Watching Marcus navigate his role as an employee in the company I had built was fascinating in ways that probably weren't entirely healthy. During client presentations where he would reference strategies and market insights that I had developed, I found myself remembering all the times he had dismissed my business acumen as cute or impractical. Now he was implementing my methodologies and representing my company's expertise to generate revenue that ultimately supported my vision and leadership. The most striking change was in his demeanor. The confident, somewhat arrogant man who had once explained to me why business was too complex for women to understand had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely humble and careful not to overstep professional boundaries. He worked hard, stayed late when projects demanded it, and treated his colleagues with a respect that I honestly hadn't seen him show to many people during our marriage. In team meetings, Marcus contributed valuable insights about client psychology and sales strategy, but he did so with a deference that was completely foreign to the man I had once been married to. When David Kim asked for his opinion on campaign approaches or client communication strategies, Marcus would offer thoughtful suggestions while being careful to frame them as input rather than directives. The transformation was so complete that I sometimes wondered if professional humiliation had taught him lessons that years of marriage hadn't. The strangest moments came during company social events, the quarterly team lunches, holiday parties, and celebration dinners that are essential for maintaining company culture. Marcus would participate politely, making appropriate conversation with colleagues while carefully avoiding extended interactions with me. At our annual awards dinner, when I gave a speech about the company's growth and thanked the entire team for their contributions, I noticed him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. It looked like a mixture of respect, regret, and something that might have been pride. 3 months into his employment, we had our first substantive work conversation during a client crisis that required input from multiple departments. One of our largest retail clients was facing a public relations challenge that threatened to impact their upcoming holiday campaign, and we needed all hands on deck to develop a response strategy. Marcus's experience with crisis management from his previous positions made his input valuable, and for 20 minutes in my conference room, we worked together as professionals solving a complex problem. It was surreal to collaborate with someone who knew me so intimately on personal matters, while maintaining strict professional boundaries around our past relationship. When he suggested a media strategy that built on concepts I had originally developed, I found myself wondering if he remembered dismissing similar ideas when I had shared them at home years earlier. The client crisis was resolved successfully, and Marcus's contributions were genuinely valuable to the outcome. In the debrief meeting, David Kim specifically praised his strategic thinking and client communication skills. As I listened to my operations manager commend my ex-husband's professional capabilities, I felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication because it proved that I had always been capable of working with smart, competent people. And sadness because Marcus had never been able to see me as someone worthy of that same professional respect. The most telling incident occurred during his 6th month with the company. Marcus had been working on a particularly challenging account, a local technology startup that was struggling to communicate their value proposition effectively. The client was demanding, the timeline was tight, and the project required exactly the kind of strategic thinking that Marcus had once claimed was beyond my capabilities. I overheard him on a phone call with the client, explaining our agency's approach to brand positioning and digital strategy with confidence and authority. He was essentially selling services and methodologies that I had developed, using my frameworks and strategic models to solve problems that he once would have insisted I couldn't understand. The irony was so complete it felt almost theatrical. Later that day, David Kim mentioned that Marcus had specifically requested to work on more strategic accounts rather than just execution-focused projects. He says he's learning a lot about integrated marketing approaches and wants to develop those skills further, David reported. He seems genuinely interested in understanding how we develop our strategic frameworks. I realized that Marcus was essentially asking for the opportunity to learn the business philosophies and methodologies that his ex-wife had created, the same concepts he had dismissed when they came from me directly. The universe's sense of humor was apparently both precise and relentless. 6 months after he joined the company, Marcus had become a solid, reliable employee who contributed meaningfully to our client success and team culture. He was never going to be the ambitious superstar he had once imagined himself to be, but he was proving to be exactly the kind of competent, professional team member that growing companies need. The strange justice of the situation wasn't lost on me. The woman he had told couldn't be a CEO was now his boss. The business ideas he had called cute were now the source of his paycheck. The future he had dismissed as impossible was now the reality he worked within every day. It was exactly the vindication I had never known I was seeking. By the time Marcus had been with the company for 8 months, something fundamental had shifted in our professional dynamic. The change was so gradual that I almost didn't notice it happening, like watching a sunrise. You don't see the moment when darkness becomes light, but suddenly the world looks completely different. It started with small things. During team meetings, Marcus began asking thoughtful questions about our strategic methodologies, rather than simply implementing what was asked of him. He would reference concepts from our training materials in his client communications, and I could hear genuine understanding in how he explained our approaches, rather than just repeating memorized talking points. The first time I truly noticed the transformation was during a quarterly review meeting where David Kim was presenting performance metrics for the account management team. Marcus had exceeded his targets for client retention and revenue growth, but what struck me was how he had achieved those results. Instead of relying solely on traditional sales techniques, he had begun integrating the consultative approach that formed the foundation of our company's philosophy. Marcus has really embraced our methodology of becoming a strategic partner rather than just a service provider, David reported. His clients are commenting on how much they value his insights about their business challenges, not just his ability to execute campaigns. After the meeting, I found myself reflecting on the irony of that assessment. The man who had once dismissed my business acumen was now succeeding by implementing the exact strategic thinking he had claimed I couldn't understand. But rather than feeling vindicated, I felt something closer to sadness for the years we had both lost to his inability to see my potential. The real breakthrough came during our company's annual strategic planning retreat. All department heads were required to present analysis and recommendations for the following year's growth initiatives. Marcus, as a senior account manager, wasn't required to participate, but he approached David with a request to contribute insights about client retention and service expansion opportunities. His presentation was impressive, well-researched, thoughtfully structured, and built on solid data analysis. As I listened to him discuss market trends and client psychology with genuine expertise, I realized that I was seeing Marcus as a professional for perhaps the first time in our entire relationship. During our marriage, he had always talked about his work, but I had never observed him actually doing it with competence and insight. More significantly, his recommendations demonstrated that he had absorbed not just our tactical approaches, but our core business philosophy. He spoke about the importance of understanding client needs deeply, building long-term relationships based on results rather than relationships, and positioning our agency as indispensable partners rather than interchangeable vendors. These were principles I had developed through trial and error during my early consulting days, and hearing him articulate them with genuine understanding felt like validation I hadn't known I needed. After his presentation, several team members complimented his analysis, and I could see genuine pride in his response. Not the defensive arrogance he had displayed during our marriage when his expertise was questioned, but the quiet satisfaction of someone who had earned respect through competent work. The most surprising moment came 2 weeks later, during a client crisis that required immediate strategic intervention. One of our largest accounts was threatening to terminate their contract due to disappointing results from a recent campaign. The situation required someone to conduct a difficult conversation about realistic expectations, while proposing solutions that could salvage the relationship. Marcus volunteered to handle the client meeting, and I found myself agreeing despite my initial instincts to manage the situation personally. I listened to his phone call from my office, impressed by his ability to acknowledge the campaign's shortcomings while redirecting the conversation toward analysis and solutions rather than excuses and blame. "I understand your frustration with these results," I heard him say, "and I want to be completely transparent about what went wrong and how we can fix it. Our initial audience analysis may have been too narrow, and I think we need to expand our targeting while adjusting our messaging strategy." He spent 45 minutes walking the client through detailed performance data, proposed modifications to their approach, and a timeline for implementing improvements. By the end of the call, not only had he saved the account, but he had secured approval for an expanded budget to implement the recommended changes. When he knocked on my office door afterward to debrief the conversation, I realized that I was looking at a version of Marcus I had never encountered before. Competent, thoughtful, and genuinely committed to solving problems rather than just protecting his ego. "That was excellent work," I told him, and I meant it completely. "Your analysis was spot on, and your communication with the client was exactly what the situation required." He looked genuinely surprised by the compliment, as if positive feedback from me was unexpected despite our professional context. "Thank you, Sylphie? I've learned a lot about how to approach these situations since joining the team. The frameworks you've developed for client relationship management are really effective." It was the first time since our divorce that Marcus had acknowledged my professional capabilities directly, without defensiveness or qualification. The moment felt significant in ways that extended beyond workplace dynamics. Over the following months, our professional interactions became increasingly natural. During strategy discussions, Marcus would offer insights that built constructively on concepts I presented, and I found myself genuinely appreciating his contributions rather than filtering everything through the lens of our personal history. The transformation wasn't just in how Marcus saw me, it was in how I was learning to see him. The man who had once dismissed my dreams was proving capable of growth, learning, and professional humility that I hadn't believed possible during our marriage. But more importantly, I was discovering that my own success had given me the emotional distance necessary to evaluate his work fairly, rather than through the filter of old resentments. The forgiveness that emerged during this period surprised me with its complexity. I wasn't forgiving Marcus for his past dismissiveness or for the years of making me feel small. Those actions had shaped our story in ways that couldn't be undone. Instead, I was forgiving myself for the years I had spent trying to earn respect from someone who wasn't capable of giving it, and for the energy I had wasted hoping he would see potential that he simply couldn't recognize. Watching Marcus succeed, in an environment that valued the strategic thinking he had once claimed I lacked, taught me something important about the difference between personal compatibility and professional competence. We had been fundamentally mismatched as spouses, but that didn't mean he couldn't be a valuable employee in the right context. The woman who had once needed his validation to feel worthy of professional success was now secure enough in her own achievements to appreciate his contributions without feeling threatened or vindicated. It was perhaps the clearest evidence of how far I had traveled from the person I used to be. 3 years after that humiliating dinner where I was told I couldn't be a CEO because I was just a girl, I sit in my corner office overlooking a bustling marketing agency that employs 23 people, including my ex-husband. The view from here, both literally and metaphorically, has taught me lessons about resilience, self-worth, and the transformative power of refusing to accept other people's limitations as your own truth. The journey from that dismissed wife to successful CEO wasn't just about building a business. It was about excavating the person I had always been underneath years of careful self-editing. Every client I served in secret, every strategy I developed, while pretending to organize closets, every late-night planning session disguised as insomnia, those weren't just steps toward professional success. They were acts of rebellion against a version of myself that had been constructed to make other people comfortable. The most profound lesson I learned was that self-worth cannot be outsourced. For 7 years, I had unconsciously delegated the responsibility for my self-esteem to Marcus and his family, allowing their assessment of my capabilities to override my own inner knowledge of what I could accomplish. The moment I decided to build my business in secret, I was reclaiming ownership of my own potential, even if I didn't fully understand that at the time. Building something meaningful while hiding it from the people closest to you teaches you uncomfortable truths about authenticity and courage. I discovered that I was capable of sustained deception when the alternative was abandoning my dreams, and that realization both troubled and empowered me. Sometimes protecting your potential requires temporary dishonesty with people who claim to love you but can't envision your growth. The financial success was gratifying, but the psychological transformation was revolutionary. Each client who trusted my expertise, each campaign that exceeded expectations, each strategic recommendation that solved real business problems, these experiences rebuilt neural pathways that had been damaged by years of casual dismissal. I was learning to trust my own judgment again, to value my own insights, and to speak with authority about subjects I understood deeply. Watching Marcus work for the company I built taught me something unexpected about forgiveness and evolution. The man who had once embodied everything that made me feel small was now succeeding by implementing strategies I had developed, serving clients using methodologies I had created, and contributing to a vision I had pursued despite his certainty that I would fail. The poetic justice was satisfying, but the real revelation was seeing that people can grow and change when placed in environments that demand their best, rather than confirming their biases. Our current professional relationship exists in a space that our marriage never could have, one where competence is valued over compliance, where results matter more than traditional gender roles, and where my authority is based on proven capability rather than granted permission. Marcus respects me now, not because he's learned to be a better husband, but because I've created a context where my leadership is undeniable and my success speaks louder than any argument ever could. The greatest revenge, I've learned, isn't proving that people who doubted you were wrong. It's becoming so fully yourself that their opinions become irrelevant. When I was building my business in secret, I was still seeking validation from the same people who had dismissed me. Now, 3 years later, I rarely think about whether Marcus or his family approve of my choices. Their assessment of my capabilities has become as meaningless as their initial dismissal was painful. The agency continues to grow, not because I'm trying to prove anything to anyone, but because I'm finally operating from a place of authentic strength rather than reactive determination. The woman who once apologized for having opinions now makes decisions that affect dozens of employees and hundreds of clients. The girl who was told she couldn't understand business now speaks at conferences about entrepreneurship and serves as a mentor to other women building their own companies. Looking back, I realized that Marcus's dismissive words at that family dinner were actually a gift, though not one he intended to give. They forced me to choose between accepting his version of my limitations or discovering what I was actually capable of achieving. The path I chose led through secrecy, deception, divorce, and professional uncertainty, but it ultimately delivered me to a life that feels genuinely mine. The business I built in the shadows of a failing marriage has become a source of light for other people. My employees who are building careers, my clients who are growing their companies, and the women, entrepreneurs I mentor who are fighting their own battles for recognition and respect. Sometimes the dreams that other people find threatening are exactly the ones the world needs you to pursue. I am no longer the woman who needed permission to believe in herself, and I will never again be the woman who apologizes for taking up space in rooms where she belongs. Has life ever led you to create a family outside of blood ties? I'd really appreciate hearing your thoughts in the comments. Your stories matter. And if this journey touched something inside you, feel free to support the channel or pass this video along to someone who needs it.